I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here. Glad to see my colleague, my friend, Ndugu Yusuf and Jamie. Brother Yusuf, how you doing, man?
Very good, thank you, sir. Good to see you as well, and Brother Kamal.
Brother
Hello,
Kamal,
hello.
how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm gonna go on mute for a moment.
Sure.
Go on mute.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, listen, we're going to do like we've been doing. That is ask each of us to say what's on our mind and see where we go from there. What I just sent you, Yusuf, was a copy of today's or Monday's Inside News, and I've got it on the screen. I want to share it out because that's part of what I wanted to talk about. AZ, can you bring this up and on the share?
When it's convenient, Al, I'd like to talk about police misconduct. That's what's on my mind.
Great. That's what we'll do then. So I want to start off by saying this is our Monday coming up paper, and
these are the three Hennepin County white female employees dressed as the Supremes.
Blackface. I guess I don't know what they thought they were doing, but both hilarious and insulting. And so the good part is that Commissioner Irene Fernando represents my district here in North Minneapolis, sent a letter out, put a statement out, which I pretty much quoted and described in the article. But she is calling for the firing of these women and disciplining them. And I think that's right that she's doing that, asking for that. And she also mentioned another incident in the same article. Let's see if I can read it here. Hold on a second. That was another example of the same kind of callousness that, this is interesting too. Don Samuels, you might know him, Yusuf.
I do.
He used to be city council member. He's announced he's running against Ilhan Omar. So that'll be an interesting contest to watch. Also, Kamal, Minneapolis School District teachers went on strike. That strike is going on as we speak. The St. Paul School District averted the strike some minutes before the strike deadline. We might want to talk about that for a minute. But I wanted to try to get this one up where I can see it better, because I want to see what the second issue was in this story with, I have to try to lean into my computer here. Outside of the issue with these women, there's another issue that the commissioner said county employees, managers ought to be fired because they are derelict and they are violating the, not so much county employees, it was Hennepin Healthcare, which is a division of the county. And that's the group that is being looked at and being examined as being relatively or not living up to the responsibilities of accountability, of decency, of transparency. So anyway, I'll leave that there. I'm going to shut this down. And Yusuf, let's go ahead and go to you. You want to lead off with the things on your mind?
Let me put my glasses on. I'd like to share with you a few paragraphs from a story that appeared in the Washington Post yesterday on police misconduct. They conducted an extensive investigation which discovered that more than $3.2 billion, billion with a B, has been spent to settle claims of police misconduct involving thousands of officers repeatedly accused of wrongdoing, and often taxpayers, property taxpayers, are in the dark. More than 7,600 officers from Portland, Oregon to Milwaukee to Baltimore to Atlanta to Minneapolis, whose alleged misconduct has more than once led to payouts to resolve lawsuits and claims of wrongdoing, according to this Washington Post investigation. The Post collected data on nearly 40,000 payments at 25 of the nation's largest police and sheriff's departments within the past decade, documenting, again, more than $3.2 billion with a B to settle claims. The Post also found in this investigation that more than 1,200 officers in the departments surveyed, of the 7,600 total officers, had been the subject of at least 5 payments. More than 200 had 10 or more. One I'm going to talk about had 17. The repetition is the hidden cost of alleged misconduct. Officers whose conduct was at issue in more than one payment accounted for more than $1.5 billion, nearly half of the money spent by the departments to resolve allegations. So these were not strangers or one-off type incidents. The total paid in Minneapolis, for instance, between 2010 and 2020. Al, would you like to take a guess what the
Let's
figure
see,
was?
probably close to 50 million.
28 million.
Okay, 28 million. Okay. Yeah.
12%. This
Mhm.
goes up to 2020, so it doesn't include George Floyd. It doesn't include
Well, so
some
that
of the more
then it would be
recent
50
ones.
million. It'd be
Okay.
50 million then, yeah.
No.
12% by officers named in multiple payments. The Minneapolis Police Department said they had no further comment regarding the inquiry. This, according to Officer Garris Parton, who was contacted by the Washington Post. Now, Kamal, the total paid in Atlanta between 2014 and 2020 was $5 million. And the Atlanta Police Department did not respond to requests for comment. But interesting, this article was interactive. So you could pull up the 25 cities individually that were included in this study, and it would specify the amount paid, the individual officers, and how many times complaints against them have been settled out of court. So you can pull up Atlanta or Minneapolis and see how many of these cases belong to Thumper. Do you know how many times complaints were made against Derek Chauvin? I gave you a clue earlier. 17.
17, huh?
There
Okay.
were only 2 verbal reprimands. So this suggests that many of these departments are sweeping this under the rug. The property taxes are going up because we, the citizens, the property tax owners, are the ones who pay these settlements
That's right.
through the local municipalities. Let me just conclude.
Wow.
New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles alone accounted for the bulk of the overall payments documented, more than $2.5 billion. In New York, more than 5,000 officers were named in 2 or more claims, accounting for 45% of the money that city spent on misconduct cases. And in New York, 4 attorneys who have secured the highest number of payments for clients separately said the high rate of claims is because of poor training, questionable arrests, and a legal department overwhelmed by lawsuits. Now, in the interest of fairness, defenders of police have a different view. City officials and attorneys representing the police departments told the Washington Post that settling claims is often more cost efficient than fighting them in court. And settlements rarely involve an admission or finding of wrongdoing. Because of this, they said, there is no reason to hold officers accountable for them. This was a statement made by Jim Pascoe, the executive director of the National Fraternal Order of Police, the nation's largest police labor union with more than 364,000 members. And we all know about Derek Chauvin. In St. Paul, we had a notorious cop whose nickname was Mustache. And in Minneapolis, there was a notorious cop for years, Lieutenant Mike Swirl, who was repeatedly promoted, whose nickname was Thumper. You can only guess how he earned that nickname. So
We had Big Red in Kansas City where Kamal and I grew up. So, yeah.
Now, this is intended to point out, we often say that racism hurts white people too, and police misconduct hurts white property taxpayers. It hurts all property taxpayers because we're the ones who get stuck with the bill. Now, in St. Paul, the St. Paul Police Department, I'm proud to announce, has initiated an early intervention program, EIP. It's been in place for some years, where if an officer receives a specified number of complaints of any nature, that the supervisor of the officer's supervisor intervenes, conducts an interview and an investigation to see if there are patterns and practices in place If this officer requires some type of retraining or discipline, or what exactly is going to minimize the number of complaints of excessive force or assault or police brutality that officer is involved in. And it's triggered by as few as 2 complaints within any one calendar year.
Mm-hmm.
And this way, most police departments do not keep track of how many complaints have been filed against individual officers. So they just continue to repeat the behavior, and the departments and the city attorneys and whoever else is involved continue to just settle out of court with the people who bring these complaints forward. They don't get publicized. They're not in the media. They don't go to human or civil rights departments. They disappear. And oftentimes the people who receive the money sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, which prohibit them from sharing the information with anyone. And they also have to agree that there's no admission of wrongdoing or guilt on the part of police department in order to receive the settlement that's awarded. So this is a significant issue. This is why people are calling for police reform. And I think the phrase defund the police is an inaccurate one, because we're really talking about reform the police, reform the budgets, so that we don't send armed military-style officers for non-legal criminal,
non-lethal.
Or for emergencies. Like if the paramedics go, frequently they're accompanied by an armed police officer, and it may require a mental health worker, it may require a social worker, it may require a building inspector, it may require the Humane Society if it involves a dog biting someone. It may require a county welfare official or somebody from Section 8 housing to address whatever or a paramedic to take someone to the hospital or to a mental health facility. It need not necessarily involve someone with a gun and a body-worn camera walking through your house, turning 360 degrees to see if there are any doobies in the ashtray. Okay? So I want to encourage the non-Black viewers and listeners to understand that this has a significant financial impact on them too. It's not just a concern in the African-American community. It should be a concern across the board because it affects all of us, and it should be dealt with within local police, human rights, labor unions, churches, and other organizations to try and minimize it and correct it, not just allow it to continue to run rampant, where somebody like Derek Chauvin has 17 complaints and only 2 verbal commands before he puts his knee on George Floyd's neck and suffocates him for 9 minutes and 29 seconds or whatever the official record on the clock was. And I wanted to share that because people can go to the WashingtonPost.com, read the story. It appeared on March 9th. And again, it's interactive for the 25 cities. St. Paul was not listed, or I would have shared that information as well. But I thought Minneapolis and Atlanta were illustrative. And it's significant, Kamal, that Atlanta has a much larger population than the Twin Cities combined and only had 5 million, while Minneapolis, and that was only for 6 years, 2014 to 2020, while Minneapolis had 28 million. And this was before the 27 million to a white woman who was shot and killed by an officer in South Minneapolis. And how much was it for George Floyd's family?
About 25 for Christine, I think, 28 for George Floyd.
So 25 for the Australian woman and 28 for George Floyd. And we've got the Dante Wright case coming up, and it was 12 million in Louisville for Breonna Taylor's family. So this is not something new, but it is coming to light largely because young people like the 17-year-old sister who filmed George Wright laying on the ground.
George Floyd.
He was running out of his clothing and down the gutter and down the block, because he was dead. People have cell phones with video capacity and are filming a lot of these incidents. And other people suggest it's the behavior hasn't changed, the technology has changed, and that's why these incidents are coming to light. And that's why these lawsuits are escalating along with these settlements. But I thought it was interesting. I was glad that the Washington Post conducted such an extensive and expensive investigation for a single story and would put the interactive information in the story so people could click on it if they go online, WashingtonPost.com. The story was brought out on yesterday, March 9th. And it's got a lot of good information for people on the ground who are addressing these issues to be able to look at what the impact is in their local communities. Kansas City was also not listed for some reason, although I believe it is one of the 25 largest cities, because I looked for that as well. I thought that would also be of interest to both you, Kamal, and Al.
Mm-hmm.
But that's on my mind. The St. Paul chapter of the NAACP, let me say this in closing, has had an agreement with the St. Paul Police Department since 2001. We meet every other month. We participate in the training of their cadet academies. The police and the NAACP reached this agreement because of concerns about racial profiling, and it was mediated by the Justice Department back when William Corky Finney was the chief of police, a brother who grew up in the Rondo neighborhood in the Black community. And we have met with and continued this agreement with every chief since, Chief Harrington, Chief Smith, and now Chief Axtell. And we are publishing an addendum to that 21-year-old agreement has been published because we have new technology. We have the weaponization of the military equipment that the federal government and the armed services are giving police departments. We have body-worn cameras. We have, facial recognition, a lot of new technology. So we have amended our original agreement to bring it up to date. And we're hopeful that it will contain a section on the banning of no-knock warrants as part of the agreement between the local chapter of the NAACP and the St. Paul Police Department, which in spirit we have agreed to. So there are positive things happening with local police departments around the country, and I'd like to think that St. Paul was one of them. St. Paul had the highest number of officer-involved fatalities in the state of Minnesota. And we are working very closely with the chief of police and with his leadership team around issues that have an impact, not just in the African-American community, but in the community broadly. So I'm sorry for going on so long, but.
Oh, no. It's good information, Yusuf.
Good information and very, very, very informative.
It's also a reason why many people in the African-American community mistrust the police, and it testifies to the fact that if something happens in Ferguson, it's a stain on law enforcement officers across the country. It's not just restricted to Ferguson. That's why what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis created worldwide responses and consequences and reactions, because it wasn't just unacceptable in Minneapolis, it was unacceptable globally. People in other countries were holding, civil disobedience protests, marches, rallies, and the like. And I think that these have really awakened the consciousness of issues that people in the Black community have been bringing before local elected and appointed officials and police departments for decades, that people are now finally have stopped saying, well, you're overreacting, or you're imagining, or you're blowing this way out of proportion, or this was an isolated incident. I mean, we're looking at 7,600 officers who were involved in these settlements, and that's 25 cities, okay? That's very significant. You divide 7,600 by 25, you got a significant number of officers in many, many police departments around the country, not just the big ones, Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, but small ones, rural ones, and other ones as well.
And 7,600 doesn't include those who were not settled.
Yeah.
There was probably a lot more that were not settled, which leads me to
when nobody's looking.
Yeah, continue to believe that it's systemic. You know, the attitude of the police departments, the chiefs, right on down the line, is systemic. That they feel as though they can do what they want to do.
Mhm.
I'm hoping that as a result of George Floyd, if the protests and the eyeballs, like what you're saying, meeting with the police, I'm hoping that kind of calms it down, or that the police will begin to investigate themselves or take seriously how they police. But I believe that I know that it's a systemic problem within the police departments, covering up for each other.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's one other consequence to this whole thing. These are the number of cases that have been reported. And as you mentioned, a number have not been reported. And one of the consequences of body-worn cameras is that when people tell an officer, I'm going to file a complaint against you as a result of this arrest or this harassment or this interaction, the police officers say, I can give you the information on how to do that because this entire episode has been recorded on body-worn camera. So the number of people who are the subject of the video and the audio recording are not willing to file a complaint because there may be additional evidence on that body-worn camera that could result in additional charges against them. Okay, if they call the officer out of his name or refuse to cooperate. And so the number of complaints is going down because they're being videotaped and audio taped by police officers, which is very interesting because the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department, Hennepin County, Minneapolis is in Hennepin County, and I think there are 28 cities or something like that, maybe 30 some in Hennepin County. The Hennepin County Sheriff's Department uses facial recognition technology, and they can come to a peaceful civil protest and rotate their body and film everybody in the audience, and then start pulling, get the guy in the black narrative T-shirt because he's got expired parking tickets or he's behind on his child support payments, or we've got a warrant out for his duress or some other nonsense. And the darker a person is, the higher the error rate is, up to 70% for African Americans in terms of facial recognition. If you ran Barack Obama's picture through there, it would say that he had a felony conviction back in 1989 and had missed his parole violation, and they put a warrant out for his butt. That's how unscientific and how inaccurate facial recognition is. Okay, now a white person, it'll pick them out of the crowd in a minute, but a person of color or a female, because hairstyles change, etc., the error rate just skyrockets. And so a lot of brothers are being pulled in based on facial recognition that's bogus. There was a brother in Detroit. The police knocked down his door, threw him down on the floor. He put his dog in the basement. They went down the basement, shot his dog, and tore up the house, emptied the drawers, cut up the couch and the mattresses. And he asked if he could see the warrant. The warrant was for the house next door. Okay. wasn't even his house. This is similar to the Amir, what was Amir's last name? The brother who was shot downtown Minneapolis.
Right. I'm blanking on Amir. Yeah.
I've got Alzheimer's. You have to forget.
Right.
I have these brain farts all the time. The brother who was shot,
Yeah.
Because they had a no-knock warrant, went in 3 apartments and he was asleep under a blanket. Sad. And it's happening every day somewhere. The Breonna Taylor incident. It's real tragic. So people need to look at use of force. They need to look at stop and search. They need to, insist
no-knock warrants.
The local police department keep racial data in terms of how many people they're stopping and where, so that they can see patterns and practices and correct them, resolve them before they, turn into, what percent of Ferguson's city income was coming from bogus tickets and fines that they were imposing against people in the black community? Something like 78% of the city's income.
It was a business for them, and it was a captive audience, captive market,
Open
and
season.
they treated it like a market, right?
Yeah.
And so we have been this is Alan McFarlane. We get the money, we get the misery, they get the money. They make money on our misery, and they make us miserable, right? And so they farm and nurture and cultivate misery in our experience, in our community, and misery in our minds in a way that works to their advantage. I'm reading, I think I told you guys last time, a couple of books here. One, I showed it, I think, to you, yes, Yusuf. What in
Iquayama?
Yeah, Aque Arma, yeah. And this one, the what in Shem stands for the way of companion, and it suggests that we examine a different model or rediscover models of how we were able to be together as evolving human beings out of our African antiquity. And it suggests that the model that predominates in the world over the past 2,000 years was an aberration or a departure from what the original framework that guided the development of humankind over millennia, over thousands of years, out of our emergence into being human beings. And the way of companion suggests that there's a process for growth, development, communicating, inculcating, nurturing culture that at its nature is cooperative and collaborative and has as its hallmark a commitment to everybody being included. That part of the breadth of the process is that the intent and the work at hand is the full development of every human being. And so the pace of development was not important. It was the thoroughness that invited everybody into a pathway of self-realization that was important. And he suggested that that understanding of how we should be with each other is something we have to discover again. And I think you and Kamal and I have talked about this in the sense of modern times, in reflecting on what communities could have been and maybe used to be. There were glimpses of that foundational set of relationship being that has always been part of our DNA. But how do we become more intentional, more aware, be confident in the historicity of this approach, of the foundational, almost cosmology, the naturalness of being together in a way that does not depend on power to control the power of a few to control the many. The book goes on to talk about how the deviation from that preliminary strategy of this way of companions came when another mindset of being impatient with the time it takes for all of us to be together all the time, to grow, to share, to know, etc. And that some strategies developed to get people, because they were inclined to a point of power and decision, and to use knowledge to appropriate power and decision making, and with that discovery to by intent disadvantage other people. So the idea of minority controlling majority emerged and refined itself over centuries, over millennia, and is operating in the world today. And where we may be at this moment is at a place where we can more clearly see the divergent strategies of how we are and the conflict it means in the world. And we're in a position now to make a change, to make a choice, and that we may discover the ability to move back to something that is quite natural and quite normal for us as African people, and that is the way of companionship and the philosophy that guides us to ensure that everybody we know has every opportunity to be all she can or he can, and that we depend on each other and we are obligated to each other to fuel awareness, consciousness, success, joy, happiness, and beyond. that as opposed to operating on the principle of scarcity and the principle that I got mine, you get yours, or I'm going to hoard mine because there's a scarcity at operation in the world. And since there's a scarcity, I'm going to make sure I get it. And if you don't get it, that's your problem, right? And the other model says, yes, there may be scarcities that are seasonal, but you can plan, you can organize. So you minimize the impact and you render an entire community, society, world impervious to natural occurrences of floods, disasters, scarcities, because you've planned and you stored and you have systems that elevate the capacity for people to live beyond things that occur naturally in time. So anyway, what's it all come back to? It comes back to this question right now. I think, Yusuf, as you were speaking, I was just thinking about the power and the of technology. You mentioned the young lady who had the cell phone. And
17 years old.
What's different now is that we all have access to this technology globally. And that is so significant, so important, because it allows us to, again, be with each other globally in ways that we never were before. The disadvantage we had before was that information about us was always parlayed through somebody else who would spin it for his or her advantage. And we would end up trusting that process and not even our own minds, our minds conditioned to believe that because they said it, it must be true. Because they're rich, it must be true. Because they're powerful, it must be right. And all of that is part of a system of getting acquiescence and buy-in to this dynastic approach to living that the Europeans got out of Africa, but they took it to a degree that is unbelievable. That's what we're looking at today. But the question is, what will we do for the future? That is unsustainable. And I think our obligation and our duty is to discover what sustainability means and to believe that the notion of sustainability will probably come from us rediscovering things we knew and things we did and using our intellect and innovation to restore our fullest, most genuine, most authentic selves. And in doing so, we bring a gift to the world and to humanity. I don't know. Come out what you think. Am I just whistling Dixie here? What's the deal?
No, there's some utopianness in there's some utopian thinking there. But I believe that capitalism, the overriding system of capitalism, kind of works against all of what working together would signify, would mean. I think that probably in my view, I've seen where it's dog eat dog. Get mine. If I have to step over you to get it, I'll do that. And when my last years in corporate America, let me go back. My first years in corporate America, back in the mid '70s, when there were few blacks in corporate America, we tended to hang together. It was unthinkable that you would pass another black in the hallway or corridor and not make the nod or not acknowledge him. That was in the mid '70s. I found that by the 2000s, especially with young blacks who had gone to majority white, who had majority white educations their entire lives, who had gone to white grade schools, white high schools, white colleges. It got to the point where you pass them in the corridor and they would look away. They didn't want to be acknowledged as, So on the one hand, I believe, I said all that to say that I think that there are people in both races, in all races, who believe in a communal way of life. and what's best for the group is best for everyone. But I think the capitalism fights against that. It's it's monopolistic. Let me get as much as I can get. So even I think it's important that we have Black institutions where Black people, like in the narrative, the who think along those lines get together. But I find that, like in the NAACP, I was a member of the National Bar Association. There's a divergence of thoughts completely.
Mm-hmm.
When Clarence Thomas was being nominated for the Supreme Court, I thought that if any institution would vote against him, it would be the National Bar Association. And that's the largest Black organization of lawyers in the country.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got there, I mean, the Black Republicans had organized. People who I didn't even know were Republicans had come out, and they were for him. And of course, the arguments were, well, once he gets on the Supreme Court, you can put all that stuff he's done beforehand, which was enough to say, hell no,
Right.
He won't have to do that. But as we learned, he had been well tested,
mm-hmm.
and he adhered to the philosophy that he had grown to adopt.
Mm-hmm.
So I say all that to say that, Black, as much as Black as I am, and as much as people say, hey man, he's a nationalist and blah blah blah, I no longer assume that because a person has a Black face, mm-hmm. that they are for the things that I think are universal humanity.
Hey, Al Sharpton says, just because they skin folk doesn't mean they kin folk.
Correct. And my life in Africa proved to be that too. I mean, because here, everyone was, all of us were Black. Mm-hmm. But then it was a tribal thing. If you didn't have the right marks on your face, then you were an outsider.
You were incognito.
You were outsider, and you didn't deserve to be treated as human sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Al, you talked about Aikwe Arma earlier. He published a novel called 2000 Seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That was written in the same context as Chancellor Williams' Destruction of Black Civilization,
yep.
and Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And just an absolutely incredible writer and author, putting out such incredible information. I mean, thank you for sharing that. Like the slave said, capture knowledge, fly to freedom, and it's out there. All you have to do is put your arms around it and embrace it.
Here's the other one I'm reading by him, and that's Remembering the Disremembered Continent.
Yeah.
And that's Aikwe Arma as well. Interesting reading. It really is. It's fascinating reading. And I'm just excited that like through this and through, I picked up my Chancellor Williams books and others, and I'm sort of delving again in the space that I occupied in terms of reading a while back. But I'm having the time of my life sort of rediscovering and rethinking and seeing what it means in the context of today. For example, in this book, as well as in the Wat and Shensha, they raised the question of the American and European education system. What is its purpose? And what is its purpose particularly around people who are not European, people who are not white? And he gives an analysis of the period of time where African communities, societies transformed themselves into the modern states. And then after that, how they approached self-rule, self-control, independence. The creation, he talked about, of a elite or intellectual class that really was French, German, Portuguese, in black skin, that the leaders, the intellectual elite, okay, good point. People are dying in Ukraine and they're talking about color. Unreal. Almost say some more about that. That's great. But so the question is the system, the process that miseducated the Africans into accepting the artificial boundaries of Africa that came out of the great meeting in Europe, 1885 or so, the
84, the
84,
Berlin Conference,
where they created new boundaries, new states, and indoctrinated black people to support it. Yeah,
new possessions.
New possessions. And so the question is, how do we examine and question these recent histories and the purpose and the meaning? And we are educated to assume that because they did it, it must be right. And that's something that we have to question and think that we have the ability to offer a different strategy. And the strategy doesn't have to be based on their analysis of the world. So that's what I'm thinking.
You know, this note that came up about Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
you know, my wife has been on CNN, you know, listening to that. And I understand that that's, you know, that's a gangster move that Putin is doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I asked my wife, what about Israel and Palestine?
Mm-hmm.
What about the bombings that's going on there?
Mm.
You know, just taking people's property. So it's hard for me to disconnect those two. And it's a Western, what I feel I'm getting is a Western perspective of what's happening here in Ukraine. You know, you have a communist, or what they want to call authoritarianism, and now they're trying to say the man is crazy or insane. And I don't know. I don't know. But I know that there are other wars going on in Africa, the Congo. This thing has been going on for I don't know how long.
Read Mark Twain's soliloquy about the Belgian Congo. All right.
Right. So, you know, I know they're all up in arms about what's happening in Ukraine, but I believe it's more about Western powers. And you know, when you look at what happened in the early 60s with Kennedy and Khrushchev, you know, when Russia was putting missiles or wanted to put missiles in Cuba, mm-hmm. Kennedy said, hell no. Mm-hmm. And that's the same position that Putin is taking with regard to Ukraine being a part of NATO and having missiles at his border.
The United States pulled him out of Turkey in exchange for him coming out of Cuba. Okay. And,
yes.
You know, the book I was referring to is King Leopold's soliloquy, written by Mark Twain, which was banned in this country for 50 years. And King Leopold killed enough Africans in the Congo to build a fence with their bodies from New York to San Francisco. Millions of people killed. And if there are 52 independent nations on the continent of Africa, Africa is not a country. Why is it that we need 83 U.S. military bases in those 52 independent nations, okay, to protect all of those precious minerals that go into the computer screens, the smartphones, the computers, the laptops, the smartwatches, and
catalytic converters? Yeah.
They want to continue to rape those minerals from Africa for 5 cents for every 2,000 pounds, bring them over here and refine them, and then suddenly they're worth, you know, $5,000 a pound for there are no microchips for new cars because they're all in boxcars on these ships, those containers coming here from China and from other places, because the manufacturing in this country couldn't make money fast enough for Wall Street. So they've all got into investing and, you know, banking and the stock market. And, you know, if you look at the Twin Cities, I don't know what the situation is in Atlanta, but the majority of our gross national product here is in the information industry. 3M, iMation, Control Data, all of these companies that deal in information. And that's where the U.S. economy is headed. And they're saying that the Third World War is not going to be a traditional military war with foot soldiers. It's going to be a cyber war, okay? And they're going to shut down the power, the electricity, the water, the healthcare, the technology, the banking, the whole 9 yards, and we're just going to have chaos and revolution in the streets as a result of it. And they've already tested it in a number of countries and in a number of industries. It's really quite fast.
I thought it was interesting that Putin shows up in China, ostensibly to open up the Olympics.
And China has refused to impose any sanctions against Russia since the invasion of Ukraine. So has Mexico. Mexico
and China and Taiwan.
Saudi Arabia. Arabia, Mexico, Taiwan, China are saying
China does not relinquish Taiwan. And that's, you talking about the chips. The company that makes the best chips is located in Taiwan. The best chips, because the United States has shut down their chip industry because as Yusef said, they didn't see how they can make money, and it's easier just to push that stuff off. Well, now Taiwan makes the best chips. So if China decides to make the move to take Taiwan,
it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
Technology.
Kamal, and gasoline is $7.80 a gallon in Los Angeles today. Okay, today, and look at what's happening in the grocery stores. Hardware stores. Supply chain, supply and demand. People are hoarding again. Stuff is backed up in ports all over the country. It's unbelievable, man.
Yeah, and this is a result.
The problem with capitalism is not that it's bad; it's that it's working too good. It's capitalism is running 200%. Okay, perfectly oiled machine, and the only thing that increases in the production process is the value of labor, because the raw materials are still only worth what they are in their true sense, and then when they're assembled, they're worth 10, 20, 30 times as much, whether it's a chair or a computer or a cell phone or whatever it happens to be. And, you know what it costs to replace one of those batteries in a Prius automobile? Try $6,000. And how many people have that kind of disposable income when the car reaches 100,000 miles? Okay. It's nice to be green, but that battery travels through 6 countries before it arrives at the assembly plant and goes into a Toyota. And they're moving to all electric. And again, where are those lithium ion raw materials coming from? From the continent.
From the continent.
Yeah.
Well, the hope is that the more people use them, it will bring the price down. It'll drive the price down. And I remember the first cell phones. The big clunky ones.
Yeah, it looked like a lunchbox.
Yeah, it looked like a lunchbox, and now they're they're this.
So, but the price is still up. The price went down, and the price is back up because these phones are relatively expensive
and going up $1,000. What's an iPhone 13 cost? $1,200-$1,300. I don't see a lot of them in the projects, man.
Capitalism. Let me tell you this story. When the stadium opened, when the Atlanta Stadium opened to the Braves after the Olympics, the Braves got the stadium, and the vendor who had the vending rights, some big company, I can't think of it. It's a huge vending company. I think they're in Pennsylvania. They were charging $5 at that time. This is back in '97. For a bottle of Dasani, a bottle of water. All right. So they sent me to talk to this guy, Airmart. That was the name of the company.
Yeah, coffee company.
They sent me to talk to Airmart because people were attacking the Coca-Cola company for charging $5 for a bottle of water in the 98-degree heat in Atlanta. And so I asked the question. I asked him the question. I told him what was happening, and he just kind of looked at me. And I asked him. I said, "Well, what do you think a fair price is?" His response was, "The highest price I can get."
Whatever I can get.
The highest price I can get. So when I say these phones have, there's no connection to how much it costs to make these phones and what they charge us for.
Well, that was
other
true
than
for those.
what
they can get.
That was true for those $200-300 tennis shoes that the kids were buying.
What they can get.
Yeah. And
what we're willing to pay.
I had a scientist tell me that when the automobile plants were running 24 hours a day, that the cost of manufacturing a car was less than half of what it was selling for, because the company ordered 20,000 windshields, and 40,000 taillights and 60,000 doors and 80,000 windshield wipers, and they bought them in such volume that the price went way down. Are you familiar with Rubbermaid products?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Let me say this about Walmart, okay, for the people who are Walmartians who shop there. Walmart went to the Rubbermaid factory in Indiana and said, "We want to purchase 200,000 units." And the people at Rubbermaid said, "Good, we can handle that. We can increase the production process, and you can have them in 3 months." And they said, "But here's the thing. We're only going to give you $5.25 for them." And the people at Rubbermaid said, "Well, we have living wages, we have pension, we have vacation, we have benefits, we have health care. We take real pride in paying our workers, and they take a lot of pride in their work. It cost us $9 to manufacture each of those items. Why would we sell it to you for $5.25? And the guy from Walmart said, "Because the Chinese company has already pirated the mold, and we'll give you $5.25 for them because that's what they're charging us, but we have to pay for the shipping all the way from China. So if we can get them from you, that's what we're prepared to give you. We'll undercut the Chinese company." Rubbermaid shut down the factory, and they had an auction to sell off all of the manufacturing equipment that made all of these Rubbermaid products. You know who came and bid on the molds and the machines that were in the factory to produce these projects?
Chinese.
The Chinese companies
Yeah.
that was pirating them and selling them to Walmart. So Walmart could put them on their shelf for $15, and they were paying $5.25 for them.
It's about understanding interest, So let me read this from this other book, from Remembering the Dismembered. It speaks to what we're talking about now. It says, let's see, where am I? One is that there's a vast difference between what a designer thinking as an African can aspire to, and what a designer limited to thinking as a Kenyan, a Ghanaian, a Senegalese, or Mozambican only can aim at. The point in that is that how do we come up with a frame of reference that is continental, Africa as a continent, and African people as a people versus as New Yorkers or Minnesotans or Northsiders or Jamaicans, all of which we are, but we're not simply that. So the question is, where are you going to stand, and what's the vantage point from which you approach examining, analyzing both the problem and the opportunity? And he goes on talking about energy is the social body. Energy in the social body is blood and oxygen. Given sufficient supplies of electrical energy, school children could study more efficiently, carpenters could produce more, et cetera, et cetera. Africa, taken as a unified field, possesses great quantities of solar energy. Owing to the way the continent lies athwart the equator, the quality of our sunlight and sun power is ideal. We could generate large quantities of solar power, clean energy of a steady and even quality, enough to power the industrial flowering of the continent. Well, this chapter talks about how we should envision our own control of resources in the African world, and not, as you and I have described, Youssef, look at a field of cane, then open up a packet of sugar that said made in Arkansas, right? From the same thing that we're growing in our area. So it's a question of how do we, again, reimagine. And when you say reimagine, two things come up. One goes back to the whole thing of reimagining policing.
Mhm.
Reimagining. What I mean, and Kamal, you talked about the difficulty, the challenge of capitalism, and the question has to become, but is it inevitable? Will it always be this way? Can it change? And if we can make a decision that it works for who it works for, and God bless the ones it's working for, but it's not working for us. So what is our duty? Is our duty to suffer, or is our duty to find another way that gives us comfort and that reflects our right to be here and to enjoy life? So I think that's a discussion we have to have and say that, not with anger or angst or fear, but just out of a rational mind, a rational analysis of our history, and a rational analysis and presentation of our desire, decide we can do something different. And the different that we will do will reflect our genius, our aims, our sensibility of our relationships to each other and to other human beings and to the planet, its resources. So yeah, utopian, but why not?
Yeah.
Why not? Yeah. So listen, guys, we're at a couple of minutes to the end. Let's wrap it up. This is always wonderful. I enjoy this conversation and enjoy the time we spend together. I want to invite people who are listening on any of the social media platforms to join the conversation. We're going to keep posting the link of the actual StreamYard and if you want to come on, just jump on and we'll let you in and have you be part of this conversation. Yusuf, final thoughts? Kamal, final thoughts for today?
I'm reading a book of Black folk tales, and it's an excellent gift for children, grandchildren, neighborhood kids. It's called The People Could Fly, and I want to highly recommend it. And as always, Al, I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate and contribute to the dialogue, and wish both of you to remain safe and stay Black. Kamal?
Yeah, I'm still plotting through on 1619, and I'm reading all three of my books. I have them in different spots. So,
yep.
And that I'm finding that the raised fist, bent knee, the history of blacks in sports in America, and where they are now, has really been interesting. I'm reading a chapter now on black coaches. And not only in football, they're having a struggle with it, but in basketball, it's taking off. In baseball, it's horrible. But so I'm reading that, and then I'm still plotting through the second. That one is, I think, is very informative. It gives you arguments against everyone being armed. That was never the intention of the Second Amendment, where everybody had to have their own gun.
Sure. Come on.
And in Georgia now, they're passing legislation that makes it legal for anyone to carry a gun without a permit.
Kamal, you know how you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
There you go, brother. That's how we read too. One bite at a time.
One bite at a time.
Listen, guys, thank you so much. We'll see you next week, okay?
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.